Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. New trade tariffs unveiled by US President Donald Trump send shockwaves across global markets. The EU calls it a major blow to the world economy as China vows to retaliate against what it's described as bullying by the US. And the Myanmar earthquake death toll rises to over 3,000 people, with hundreds still missing. Our top story today. President Donald Trump's new tariffs on US imports have sent shockwaves across global markets and have been condemned by the European Union and other key US allies. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen described them as a major blow to the world economy. Let's take a look.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us.
Let's get into this further with Professor John Ryan, Network Research Fellow at CES IFO and a Senior Advisor in Geoeconomics and also Geopolitics. John, thank you for joining me. Why is the European Union facing bigger tariffs than the UK?
Because the EU is a much bigger entity and it's a bigger exporter into the US market. So that is very clear that when you were listening to President Trump talk about the two main targets of these tariffs, that were going to be China, first of all, and the European Union, with a particular emphasis on Germany.
Wall Street opened sharply lower amid recession fears. In Europe, the market response has been much more measured, but still negative. Would you say that investors in America's listed companies are more concerned about the fallout in the domestic economy there?
So I think this is an interesting question because with the tariffs that are being put forward, there's a cost element to American businesses. So, for example, one of the purposes of these tariffs is to reshore manufacturing back to the United States. So companies like Apple, which have a heavy presence in China, Taiwan, and other Asian countries, have made a commitment to reshore some of that back to the United States. This is all well and good, but that's going to take 12 to 18 months. And the question is, will they be as effective in the United States as they have been in those Asian countries in terms of skilled labor, etc.? And also, if you're hitting China, you're hitting one of the countries that actually spends a lot of money on some of the technology companies actually advertising their goods, like Meta. So that's the cost issue. I think what will come is the revenue issue when the EU and China's retaliation kicks in. So the revenue that I think President Trump thought he was going to get is going to be much less than he envisaged. And we're seeing that in the marketplace because, in effect, a lot of people can't really work out in the marketplace what is the strategy here.
John, since US Vice President J.D. Vance made that speech at the Munich Security Conference, relations with the European Union appear to be strained. And in light of the higher tariffs on the bloc, where does this leave the EU-US partnership? And where could China possibly step into this mix?
So I think that you've got a situation where not only in terms of defense and security, there is a feeling overall in Europe that America under President Trump can no longer be counted on or trusted to be a security or defense partner in the future. And these tariffs only accentuate that feeling. And yes, I think there's three main blocks in the global economy: the United States, the EU, and China. Of course, there are other countries like India, etc. But those blocks now will probably interchange, because Europe was more aligned to the United States, especially under Presidents Obama and Biden. But I think they will not, and I think China will see an opportunity here to actually work with the European Union if they can smooth over some of the difficulties they've had in the past. Because for the global economy now, and for all of those three countries, it's going to be a very, very rough time. So there is an opportunity that there might be a rebalancing of that trilateral relationship. Maybe the EU may edge towards China more, but we'll have to wait and see how this all pans out with what the EU comes up with in terms of its retaliation of the tariffs that Trump's imposed.
Donald Trump appeared to spare America's traditional foes. Many people are wondering why the likes of Russia, Cuba, Belarus and North Korea appear to be left off that list that he showed us last night in the Rose Garden. Any ideas why this could possibly be?
Russia has been sanctioned since the Ukraine war. Other allies of Russia have also had that issue played in. So I think that they were never going to be there. I mean, they've been under severe pressure since the start of the Russian-Ukraine war. So they were not a factor. I think he's made it very, very clear that his targets are China and other countries where, for example, Vietnam, where a lot of companies came out of China and went and relocated in Vietnam. And there's if you look at the chart, Vietnam is quite high on that. Although a small country, the sanctions are quite high, the tariffs are quite high. So I think he had in mind with these tariffs China and the European Union and some other country, because Russia has already been sanctioned. And remember, just recently, Putin has asked for some lightening of those sanctions in terms of facilitating his acquiescence to a peace deal.
Yes, I was just having a look at that chart, and Vietnam, 46% reciprocal tariffs. So as you say, the ASEAN countries are going to be paying a lot more. Professor John Ryan, Network Research Fellow at CESIFO and Senior Advisor in Geoeconomics and Geopolitics. Great to have your insights on the show. Thank you.
Very much.
We can now go live to Brussels to speak to our correspondent there, Ross Cullen. Ross, thanks for joining me. Can you talk us through the reactions across Europe to this news?
Yeah, Leigh Ann, let's start in France, in fact, where the President Emmanuel Macron has been hosting a meeting with representatives from some of the sectors that are going to be impacted by President Trump's tariffs. Emmanuel Macron saying that the decision by the US President to impose these sweeping import taxes was brutal and baseless, saying that the decision will leave US consumers poorer and weaker, and saying it will have a massive impact on the European economy. That is echoing the words words of Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. Earlier on Thursday, she said that it was a major blow to the world economy, these tariffs, saying she deeply regrets the choice of the US President to bring them in. The global economy will massively suffer. She said the consequences will be dire for millions of people around the world. And also, I'll just bring you one comment. A little bit earlier today, we had a news conference by the International Trade Committee Chair of the European Parliament, Bernd Lange, and he said that President Trump called it Liberation Day. Well, I call it Inflation Day, because it's totally clear the tariffs will increase prices in the US and in the EU.
Yes, of course, Ross, that is much feared. But what countermeasures is the EU planning right now?
Well, in fact, Mr. Lange, in that news conference, he said that the EU has a toolbox packed full of measures and it is not afraid of using those measures. Now, it says they could use enforcement regulations or anti-coercion instruments to potentially target more than $20 billion worth of US goods. Now, the EU is in talks with the United States. The top trade commissioner has been in Washington twice in the past 2 weeks. That dialogue is ongoing and the EU hopes that dialogue will win out and they will be able to have a negotiated solution to this crisis. But if the talks fail, Leigh Ann, then the EU says it will not back away from using retaliatory countermeasures to try to protect European exporters and European consumers.
Ross, Cullen, I think there's a lot more to go in this story. Thank you so much for joining us from Brussels. I'm sure we'll speak soon. Once again, thanks. China has vowed to retaliate against what it's described as bullying by the US after President Trump's tariff announcement. China was the hardest hit, stoking fears of an escalating trade war between the world's two biggest economies. Leigh has more on the impact the tariffs have on the Asian nation.
China's foreign ministry has accused the White House of severely violating WTO rules, saying that the US should correct its wrongdoing and that Beijing will take countermeasures. Now, China is no stranger to a trade war, and we've seen in the past what they're capable of. Tariffs for tariffs, export controls, or blacklisting US companies, or indeed a mixture of the above. Parallel to all of this, we've been seeing that China is trying to develop its trading relationship with other countries and regions, with Japan and South Korea, for example, as well as trying to speed up a free trade agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Aside from China, Asia as a whole has been hit really hard. If you look at some of the countries hit with the steepest tariffs, well, they've been Laos, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, etc. Vietnam, one of the hardest hit countries. Well, for them, the US is its top export market. This business represents some 30% of its GDP. The country had been vying to take over the title of world's factory over from China, but now with these tariffs, the US has slapped on them 46%. Well, it won't be easy. Cambodia too, 37% of its exports land in the US currently. A painful hit then for these countries' manufacturing hubs, which had actually benefited until now from the first US-China trade war. Companies from around the world had started to develop their production in Southeast Asia. Actually, very interestingly, this month, Chinese President Xi Jinping is to head down to that region, making stops in these two countries as well as in Malaysia. No doubt he'll be offering his country as an alternative power to lean on in these turbulent times. Finally, Washington's strategic allies in the Asia-Pacific region, South Korea, Japan and Taiwan, received no reprieve either.
Leigh there in Beijing. Thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Hungary has announced its withdrawal from the International Criminal Court. It comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under an ICC arrest warrant, arrives in Budapest for a state visit. Hungary is a founding member of the ICC, which consists of 125 member states. Thousands of people in Haiti have taken to the streets to protest against armed gangs. Violent groups have forced over 1 million from their homes, leading to mass hunger and a declining economy. The coalition, known as Viv and Sam, are also accused of extortion, mass rapes and killings. Senior Russian negotiator Kirill Dmitriev has met with the Trump administration over in Washington as the United States continues to push for a Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. Dmitriev is the highest-ranking Russian official to travel to the U.S. on state business since Russia's expanded invasion of Ukraine. And at least 30 people have died as a result of the Los Angeles wildfires, which raged through the region back in January. Authorities gave the update as the remains of other victims were discovered. The fires, which destroyed parts of California, burned for 3 weeks and forced thousands to evacuate their homes. Back to our top story. Some critics have likened President Donald Trump's tariffs to gambling on a global poker playing table, even arguing he's putting his presidency on the line. It comes as a new poll reveals his approval rating has fallen to 43%, its lowest since his return to office. But the president was defiant during his speech at the White House yesterday, insisting his plans will help give the U.S. economic protection. Let's take a look.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special to watch. This is transforming our nation. Our entire nation is going to be transformed, not only with the cars, but on every single other item that's built. We're going to become an industrial powerhouse.
For more on this, I'm joined from Delaware by former Trump chair Rob Arlett. Rob, great to have you on the show. Appreciate your time. So, Rob, listen, we are all digesting Trump's much-anticipated tariffs. Wall Street has opened sharply lower, with the tech-heavy NASDAQ down over 5%. The White House is telling Wall Street, trust in Trump. You've worked with Trump. Will the market reaction we are seeing across the global markets give him buyer's remorse, do you think?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with you and your audience. And I would just say not at all. I think President Trump knows exactly what he's doing and why he's doing it. And what I mean by that, quite simply, is that he just wants an even playing field. When there is a country, as an example, that's got a 200% tariff on their rice that's coming into America, that's not really fair. So at the end of the day, President Trump is only placing these tariffs on countries that are not being fair to the American citizens as it relates to their exports that are coming into this country. So at the end of the day, President Trump is a businessman. Yes, and he has said we may have some short-term difficulties, but at long term, this will be very successful. And I believe President Trump, again, he is a businessman. And so I think that the markets are showing some concern, but that's not uncommon, I think, in a situation like this. But I would say I think it's a short-term loss for a long-term big gain as it relates to President Trump. And I think he is. I think he's right on as it relates to these tariffs and why he's doing them as it relates to the American people. Because in the end, it's all about bringing back manufacturing and jobs to America and not those in other countries. That's exactly why he's doing this.
So, Rob, that's something that I just wanted to touch on with you. Economists say many companies are actually likely to pass the increased cost of imported goods onto their customers. You just mentioned the short-term pain there, but will this appear to Trump's supporter base? Are they prepared to pay more until things get easier?
Well, I guess time will find out. I think at the end, but I think it is working because there are already many manufacturers that have stated that they're coming back to America and investing billions of dollars in manufacturing facilities and plants and jobs here in America. So I think even before these tariffs came into effect yesterday, I would say that prior to that, companies knew they were coming and they were already announcing their desire and intent to invest in America and invest in the American worker. So I think out of the gate, it is working. Can the American people handle a short-term increase in some products? Not all products, but in some products? I think time will tell. I think at the end of the day, it's all about pro-America and pro-American, made in the USA, and I think that's exactly what President Trump is doing.
Howard Lutnick, the US Commerce Secretary, says there is no chance Trump will back off these tariffs. Do you think there's still room for negotiation? We always know Trump is open to phone calls, as the White House says. Do you think he'll be taking calls and trying to make a deal?
Absolutely. That's who President Trump is. So, I mean, he's already stated, if, when I would say some of these other countries back off, should they back off on some of their tariffs, then yes, President Trump will do the same on our end. So he's all about the deal, and in his mind, it's got to be fair. It's got to be a fair and equitable process around the country, around the world, I should say. And in his mind, it has not been. So in his mind, he is doing this to make it more of an even playing field. And should they reduce or omit their tariffs, would President Trump in turn do the same here? Yes. I think he's all about the deal, and he's getting their attention to negotiate and in his mind, stop taking advantage of the American consumer and therefore the American taxpayer as it relates to the economy and the commerce.
Rob, what about his critics who accuse him of almost gambling? Some people are actually saying right now this is putting his presidency on the line. Do you think this could be his downfall?
I say no. I say this actually could be part of his tremendous legacy because that's exactly what he believes. And I believe President Trump. Again, he is a very successful businessman, and he's bringing his business experience to the White House and to the American policies. So no, I think this will be something that'll be very positive and be part of his legacy. And I think that's what he wants. And that's what I, as an American, am hoping and expecting. But I believe that that will be the case. I think this will be a part of a success legacy and not just the opposite, despite what the critics are saying.
Yeah, well, there's always...
His critics are his critics. They are always critical of President Trump, no matter what he does. So we have to understand that lens, and no matter what he does, they're not going to like it. So why would they like this? Well, they won't, just because he's doing it, and again, it's an even playing field. So when the balance of tariffs is way high for other countries, why can't we just increase our tariffs to match theirs? And that's what he's doing. He's not being unfair. He's making it fair. It's really that simple.
Yes, it is that simple, but economists are still concerned this could be inflationary, it could have global ramifications, and the stock markets are kind of telling us today. So there is some concern, Rob. We must be realistic, though, when we're looking at this. And what could it mean for the midterm elections, too?
It's a great point. I think, yes, people are concerned, again, as reflective of the stock market. But again, I believe this is just a short-term initial reaction. And I think some people are already saying, well, gosh, it's a great time to buy stocks, right? As they come down, it's a good time to buy into them. So, but I think if this does not work, I would say by the end of this year, as we head into an election year next year, yes, absolutely, it could be devastating to the midterms. And whereas the Republicans keep control of Congress, but be it the Senate or the House of Representatives. So yes, this has to work, because if it does not, it will directly impact next year's election cycle, which would be a very big time negative against President Trump. Because if he doesn't have the support of Congress, he can't get the bills passed that he wants to proceed with his policies. So it is very important, and I agree with you.
Rob Arlett with the Trump red tie on. It's been a pleasure to have you on there, former Trump chair. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Anything else, I'm happy to help you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The RSF, Sudan's paramilitary, claimed they've downed a Sudanese army plane in northern Darfur. The group posted a video of the military plane wreckage earlier this week. The RSF leader said the war between his group and the country's army was not over. A British couple found dead in southwest France died by murder, followed by suicide, according to French authorities. Andrew and Dawn Searle were discovered on the 6th of February at their home near Toulouse. Mrs. Searle's body was found in the garden. Her husband's body was found inside. A federal judge has thrown out New York City Mayor Eric Adams' corruption case weeks after the Trump administration directed prosecutors to drop the charges. Adams was accused of conspiracy, fraud, soliciting illegal campaign contributions, and also bribery. He has denied any wrongdoing and will now focus on his re-election bid. And the British rock band Muse have cancelled a concert in Istanbul after the promoter criticised anti-government protest. Turkey has endured weeks of demonstrations against the arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. Muse told fans they will postpone the show until 2026 with an alternative promotion firm. The death toll from the 7.7 magnitude earthquake that hit Myanmar last Friday has now killed over 3,000 people. In a statement, the military-led government says hundreds more are still missing and nearly 5,000 have been injured. Search and rescue teams are scrambling to provide medical care and shelter for the survivors. We can now go live to Bangkok to speak to Correspondent Camenzind Broomby. Jan, a pleasure to have you on the show. The death toll is going up at an alarming rate and is predicted to get even higher.
That's right. We've seen just in the last few hours, Chinese state media reporting that death toll is now upwards of 3,100. And let's not forget, we've had independent estimates from the US Geological Survey saying that it could get up to 10,000. And why is that? Well, if you listen to what some of the international organizations that are responsible sometimes for these rescue efforts, for the humanitarian aid, what they're saying is essentially this is really a horrific situation inside Myanmar. The WHO is now warning that because of the rain that we're expecting in the next few days, and I can tell you, even here in Bangkok, it's been spitting a little bit. There is a little bit of rain here. So you can imagine in Myanmar that is just neighboring, it could be the same. That rain combined with the heat, the WHO is now warning of the risk of cholera for those people, the hundreds, if not thousands of people that are sleeping on the streets of their cities because of their houses being destroyed or because they're too scared to enter their houses for fear that they collapse due to the aftershocks that we've been seeing. The UN was saying that they've warned that there has been a lack of medical supplies inside, and the World Food Programme also saying that their work has been frustrated. They're finding it difficult to work inside Myanmar. So that death toll expected to rise as we move forward in the coming days. And it's now not just the earthquake that's causing these deaths potentially, it's now also a whole risk of other issues, other complications that come when you have people living outside without shelter, without access to clean water, without food, etc., etc.
Yeah, extremely distressing pictures coming out of Myanmar. But countries around the world are now sending aid. But the reality is the civil war is complicating these efforts, right?
Yeah, we've been following this story now for 6 days almost. And one of the things that's really been in the background of these relief efforts is, of course, the fact that Myanmar is still engaged in a civil war and has been since 2021 when the military junta took over there. And actually, the military junta fired airstrikes a few hours after the first earthquake. Now, we have had some developments, though, recently. What happened was essentially in the last few days, we heard reports that the junta fired warning shots at a Chinese relief vehicle that was traveling inside of Myanmar. The junta saying they hadn't been notified that this relief vehicle was heading towards the city, the hard-hit city of Mandalay. But you can only imagine how difficult it is for those rescue teams to be operating within a civil war. And today, thankfully, looks like a step in the right direction. The junta announcing that they will be taking a 20-day pause when it comes to the engagements in the civil war. That also follows on from one of the main rebel groups earlier, even a few days ago, actually announcing that they also would unilaterally be pausing some of their operations. So that really does seem to be a step in the right direction. And why has that happened? Is that linked to the fact that there were warning shots fired at the Chinese? We know that there was some mention from the Chinese about a hope that there could be order inside and that the focus could be on the humanitarian effort. We don't know exactly why they've made that decision. But I also will say that we don't know if it will hold. Myanmar inside is a kind of patchwork in some areas of different alliances, different militia groups, some allied with the military junta, some fighting against the military junta for democracy or for self-determination. And so we're really going to have to see if this kind of piecemeal ceasefire can hold for the 20 days that the junta have said that it will be not engaging in these hostilities.
Yan, you're actually in Bangkok. What can you tell us about the situation there? Because obviously there was an aftershock. Is there any update?
Well, I can say that the buildings in Bangkok mostly are fine, but we've really seen the rescue efforts in the last few days focusing on this large building. It was going to be the State Audit Office, a government building that collapsed from 30 floors or something now into rubble on the ground. And we've been hearing different things in the last few days about whether or not there are still people alive inside. We know that there are still supposed to be dozens of people trapped inside, but whether or not we've heard vital signs, well, that's been really the big thing. And what I can tell you is that as of this morning, local media was reporting that they had heard what they thought was the sound of a woman's voice coming from inside one of the areas. And that's where we think they've been trying to focus the rescue efforts. What I will say, though, is that they haven't heard that voice since then as of this evening. So we don't know whether that's someone who's now unconscious, perhaps someone who's not been able to respond anymore, who's too weak to respond. The governor of Bangkok saying that they hope that this is a person who is inside the fire escape, which is thought to be one of the stronger areas of these buildings when they collapse, of course. So they're hoping that the person whose voice they think they heard, that they're going to be able to get them out in time. And that would be really a victory for those rescue forces. But I think they'll be carrying on regardless until they get everyone out of there, dead or alive.
Yan Camenzind, Broomby in Bangkok. Thank you for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Oil prices fell by over 3% on Thursday as a reaction to President Trump's tariff announcement. Investors are concerned a global trade war will affect economic growth and limit fuel demand. Brent futures were down $2.66 to $72.29 a barrel earlier today. Similarly, US crypto stocks fell in pre-market trading on Thursday. Investor confidence has been rattled due to increasing trade tensions, prompting a sell-off in riskier assets. Crypto exchange Coinbase Global fell 4%, while major Bitcoin holder Strategy dropped 3%. A reminder of our top stories. New trade tariffs unveiled by US President Donald Trump send shockwaves across global markets. The EU calls it a major blow to the world economy as China vows to retaliate against what it described as bullying by the US. And the Myanmar earthquake death toll rises to over 3,000 people, with hundreds still missing. And that's all from us on W News. Riz Khan is coming up next, followed by Counterpoint with Melinda New-Sephora. We'll be back with W News Extra in 2 hours' time. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll see you later.